Horizon 2020 project, again, the same with I think he wants to share with you some questions, ideas on connected resources, conservation.
You write today to Daniel for this actually project, Horizon project. Okay. Daniel just wrote it. We were not able to. But I didn't recognize your name. So I just saw your name. No, 1 week ago.
Oh, 1 week ago. It is.
I was in the environment for 20 years, and I went to 5 years.
No, I was more interested in the field of
So
can you just get
when
you start
when you start,
because I will just like to speak.
Yes.
Okay, good evening. Hello, good evening. Warmly welcome to all of you to our side event, the viewpoints, on behalf of the European Forest Institute and the European Network Institute. It's a big pleasure for me to see quite many faces in the room, and I hope many more faces on the live stream, because the timing of this event was quite a difficult task. To do it in the evening, I learned from some people that wanted to come that their children opposed it, and others that don't feel well traveling from the city to here for the evening event is also quite tricky. So that's always the challenge with these type of events. Nevertheless, I think it's nice to see a room with many well-known and not so well-known faces, and it's my pleasure to welcome also on behalf of more than 20 scientists that have put heads together for more than 1 year to try to understand what is sort of the clear evidence on the Białowieża Forest controversy, what is not clear, and where they agree and disagree. We will probably introduce all people that has played a role in this event within the next presentations. For now, I just want to welcome you on behalf of Ethi's team in this, especially mentioning Agata Koncha, who is very, very, very engaged in this whole initiative from the beginning on, but also Eva Hermanovic, Jose Narillo from the Bonn team, and Ignacio has taken up the responsibility coming from Barcelona to enter into the forest world of Central and Eastern Europe for sharing the panel discussion. What do we want to do tonight? I think we have two main issues for this event. First of all, we want to introduce and show you the findings of what we call the Białowieża Science Initiative. I will have another short presentation in a minute to show you what the background of that is. But secondly, we also want to engage a bit with some distinguished panelists and with all of you in a discussion of what can we learn from this specific case. Is it a specific case? What are lessons learned for other cases for the bigger issue of forest conservation, forest protection in Europe? And also, what's the role of scientists in this debate? Well, especially for this part of the whole event, I'm delighted that we do this not only as activity, but together with a network of policymakers, scientists, and practitioners that are working on the issue of nature conservation and forest management, the European Network Integrate. It's an initiative that will be shortly presented now by one of the representatives of the initiative that we are also facilitating in the FP1 team, that exactly has this idea of connecting also diverging views on conservation, on forest management, as well as policymakers, scientists, and practitioners to discuss issues like Białowieża. Just a quick look in the program. And as I said, I will give more thorough information about the whole initiative in another presentation. We will have a short welcome by Thomas Hausmann, today representing this network from the German Ministry of Agriculture. Then it's Agata Koncha and myself introducing what we have been doing in the Białowieża Science Initiative. Then Marozeta Wilhaska from Uppsala University will introduce the key findings of this process. And then we will have this panel discussion. I will introduce the panelists later. What is important, we want to go a bit also away from the specific case in the broader debate, what to be learned from there. And as you still might have many questions, especially for Białowieża, we have a networking event afterwards with hopefully some nice food and drinks where you can also ask very specific questions again about what we have been doing in the Białowieża Science Initiative and how people assess findings and appreciate or not appreciate them. With that, I would like to hand over to Thomas Hausmann, who will give a short introduction into what the policy Network Integrate is doing. I should say a last word, he has a double role here, because he has been doing this initiative in a project funded by the German government. And we were grateful that there was the possibility to do this. It was not planned in this project, so he has a double hat. He's representing the European Network Integrate, but also he's representing the funder of this Białowieża Science Initiative. So if you have any critical comments, just give them silently to us, please. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Jürgen Winkel, for this kind introduction. And I'm very happy that I have also the honor to present you a little the framework, because you're all interested mostly in the science initiative, but I think it's very good also to show a little bit about the framework, this network integrate. The acting chair is coming from Denmark, so he asked me to also replace him tonight. What's all about? The issue is about enhancement of nature conservation in managed forests. So we are not so much focusing on set-aside area or national parks, but we are focusing on managed forests. And the word enhancement is very important for us, because nature conservation and the protection of nature is, of course, not a new topic for the forest owners and for the foresters. It's part of the sustainable forest management concept already for quite a long time. And at least the foresters I know, they love their forests. They are really committed to also protect the flora and fauna in their forest. So therefore, I think we have to be cautious to say enhancement, because, and you all followed the IPBEST report presented in Paris with quite negative results. So obviously there is room for improvement, and this is exactly the idea of this initiative to have a platform, a country-driven platform, where we meet mainly in the forest, because I think a theoretical discussion about this topic has been done at a lot of places. So the important issue is to look at best case practice in the forest, also cases which are not so successful, and also from the forest side, not again to be in its own silo, but really to have a forum with NGOs, with partners, all stakeholders involved in the forest, to have this cross-border and cross-sectoral learning and cooperation. So the main words is here knowledge transfer and capacity building. And of course, and that was, I think, mentioned also by Georg Winkel, it should be science-based. Because that's one of the topics where I believe that a lot of emotions are there, a lot of arguments are used which are maybe not scientifically so sound. So therefore, it's for us very important that the science is involved. And finally, this initiative was presented by the Minister of the Czech Republic and Germany to the Standing Forestry Committee meeting in Brussels. It got full support there, so it's part of the EU forest strategy. And if you look at the council conclusions for the evaluation of the forest strategy, this was highlighted as one of the important country-driven initiatives to implement the forest strategy. And we are very happy that also colleagues from DG Environment, Peter Löffler, and the colleagues from the beginning on board supporting this initiative, because we also believe that the EU biodiversity strategy can profit from this work. And next week, when you will have your conference from DG Environment on the biodiversity strategy, there will be also a place where forest will be discussed, and I assume that this will be one of the initiatives also discussed over there. Very briefly, as I told you, we are also trying to work in the forest, science-based, and the demonstration tool, Matteroscope, is a very interesting tool. I have no time today to explain you all the details, but just to highlight, if you have ever a chance to do some exercise on the Matteroscope site, I think this would be very interesting. So the idea is to have on a 1 hectare plot, which should be a normal forest site, all the trees measured. The economical value is, I think, very easy. So if you would harvest a tree, what would be the revenue you would get? I try to be in 30 seconds, yeah. And more difficult is the ecological value. And the idea is to focus on microhabitats. So there is a catalog on microhabitats developed by scientists. And the more time a microhabitat needs to develop, and the more rare it is, it will get a higher value point. So at the end, you have for each of the tree, you have here an ecological value, and all this is in a database on a tablet, and you have a good chance to do a virtual thinning exercise in order to find a balance between the environmental and the economical values of your forest stand. And we learned that this is an excellent tool to talk to environmental groups, because in the forest, if you really have to argue why you take out this tree or another tree, you find a very good basis to talk to each other. And that's exactly what the forum is about. The platform integrate that you find again a place to talk to each other, because that was, at least in Germany, sometimes very difficult. And I think we will also listen to the Białowieża case, where, as I learned, also sometimes people were not even talking with each other anymore. So that is exactly one of the ideas that we find a space and room to talk. As I said, it's country-driven. It's about people committed to this work, and you will find the 4 countries which have already been active. We are at the moment 15 countries. The European Commission is there, not only EU countries, also Switzerland is on board. And yeah, I believe that this is a very, very good forum for discussion. And one of the outcomes will be presented now, the Białowieża Science Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas Hausmann, for also promoting some other EFI activities, like the Masteroscope network of demonstration site for integrating forest management. That was not planned, but we are happy about that, of course. I would like to turn to the core issue why you are, I guess, mostly here tonight, which is the Białowieża Science Initiative. And I hope I would like to introduce what is the idea behind, what have we been doing, and where are we with this. So first of all, I would like to really highlight, this is a presentation I did now together with Agatha, but it's also based on the input of a team of more than 20 scientists. I will give you the names of the participating scientists very soon. First of all, a bit about the background. I guess everyone in this room knows something about the background of the Białowieża controversy. It has been very much in the media, at least in the last years, as one of the, I would think, most prominent examples of the forest-related conservation conflict in Europe. A lot of concerns from the environmental community, a lot of debate within the forest community, and recently, or not so recently anymore, also a prominent decision by the European Court of Justice against Poland, basically saying that Poland must immediately cease its active forest management operations in the forest, except for some special cases. I will not have the time to introduce this more in depth. It will be done by the next speaker who will come to the content side of the whole issue. My job is just to say what we have been doing. What were the objectives? So the starting point, and I should really mention that it was an initiative that was bottom up. So very nice, at least I can still see what I'm presenting here. And I hope I can speak so clear that you know what I'm talking about. It was a bottom-up process. It was an idea that was developing within a team of scientists, that also within academia there are controversial opinions about Białowieża Forest, depending on with whom you talk. But that we saw there is a real necessity, at least scientists need to be able to talk with each other. And they should have a platform of communicating with each other on the basis of what is scientific evidence about the Białowieża Forest controversy. So we wanted to review scientific knowledge in relation to the controversy. We wanted, and importantly, to create a space for an open discussion, again based on scientific evidence relating to the current and future situation of the forest. We also wanted, and that was the most difficult point, to identify consensus on this endpoint from the perspective of science, and also to make clear where different viewpoints exist within different scientific disciplines or different scientific camps. Always based on the best available scientific knowledge. And finally, the idea was also to draw lessons and conclusions from this case for other cases and other areas in Europe facing similar issues and debates. It was initialized and organized by the European Forest Institute within a project, as it has been expressed, funded by the German EML. It was not planned. This activity developed in the project that we thought this is really so an interesting case, and we need to try, if you have this science-based understanding, we should take it very serious and engage scientists to clarify or to talk or to get heads together and discuss on that issue. What did we do? In the first round, we selected about 20 scientists based on two main categories. First of all, academic reputation in relation to relevant topics. I'll say about what relevant topics are in a minute. And also, we're not only looking at this academic reputation in terms of scientific publication, in terms of relevant research, but we were also looking for what we call complementarity of expertise, but also perspectives. So to be very frank, we try to bring people together that think also differently in the scientific debate about the Białowieża case. I think that was, in my view, the biggest strength of the initiative, that this worked out and ended in these long discussions. We met in a workshop in Białowieża last summer. We had prepared this with what we call evidence statements by the scientists, where they reviewed the scientific knowledge and pointed out where they think there's agreement, disagreement. We had Chatham House rule setting there and tried to have an open discussion about where do you agree, where do you disagree. We were doing this on 5 thematic areas: forest ecology, forest disturbances, but also socio-economic questions. So what's the economic importance of the forest? Who's sort of what ecosystem services are economic relevant, but also what does society think about the forest? What does it perceive about it? Forest policy and governance, and also forest history. This is part of the controversy. What's the history of the forest? So do we talk about a primary forest? Do we talk about something else? We then agreed in this workshop in the end that we want to work together further in developing what we call a multi-author evidence paper. I hope this is not the German or Swedish or Polish English. And now we are here to present the findings of the paper. The paper is nearly ready. There's the last debate on the conclusions. So we produced a shorter version that we also present today, as we do not expect you to read the very long, or to present the very long draft version, and it will be available, hopefully, very soon. This is just a list of the scientists that have been participating. I've emphasized one name, Rosetta Białowieża, who will also present it one work. She had the terrible, difficult job of keeping everyone together and dealing with the very diverse comments in the paper together, supported by many other scientists and also us. Good. With that, I would like to use the opportunity to thank again, first of all, the scientists that have been participating in this process so far, with a lot of enthusiasm, with a lot of engagement, with a lot of willingness also to discuss openly and very controversial, but also again to the funder. Now I hand over to Rosetta Białowieża, who will give a bit flash to the board. You can say so and say where we are. Thank you.
Hello, you see my name on the board. I work at Uppsala University, and as Gerard said, I had this terrible job of putting all of this together.
Closer to my
Closer to microphone. Much better, yes. And now I'm just with the light. Can I take sunglasses? Can I move the microphone? Yes, sure. Because now it was this funny component, so she laughed, smiled, and enjoy my presentation. So Gerard said I would go in depth into the case. It's not possible in 20 minutes. There has been research going on this case for a long time, and it's just huge, very complicated case. But I will try to give you some overview of the key issues that we discussed, the key findings. And I don't think I need to tell you much about Białowieża Forest. You are here, so probably know what this forest is about. that it's very important, unique at European scale. The last so large piece of forest, broadly temperate forest, with maintained natural processes, specific assemblage of species, very famous in whole Europe, very controversial. You probably also know about the conflict in this forest. Georg didn't say much, I don't have much time to talk about, but basically there are, you could simplifying say, two key sides of the conflict. On one hand, which we call environmental coalition. It's people that would like to increase protection of this forest, preferably increase the area of national park, which is now about 17% of the whole Polish part of the Białowieża Forest. I'm talking only about the Polish part. This is where the controversy is played out. And then on the other hand, the other group we call, to simplify again, forestry coalition that would like to keep active management of the forest, and it's mostly representatives of the state forest, but also local people, quite many forestry scientists. And these two groups, can say, have been in conflict for about 3 decades now. As you already saw, we have these 5 groups that later became 4 groups of topics, because we realized that forest ecology, disturbance management kind of go together, and all the arguments that come up in relation to these 2 groups, these 2 topics were really overlapping a lot. So we simplified to 4 key topic areas about forest ecology, disturbances and management, forest history, socioeconomic factors, and forest policy and governance. And what I will do basically is to go through these 4 key topics and present what we came up with, what is the scientific agreement in each of them, and what it's led as something we cannot agree on because there is no evidence, or there is contradicting evidence, or maybe we interpret evidence in different ways. Starting with forest ecology, disturbances and management, there are some consent points. So basically everyone agrees this is a unique forest. Nobody says otherwise. It's a special place from ecological point of view, and it's really special on the scale of Europe. We also know that there are differences between how the forest looks like in the more protected part of the forest and the managed part of the forest. Still, even in the state forest managed part of the forest, which is the largest part of the Białowieża Forest, you have much richer biodiversity and more forest structures that are important for biodiversity when you compare it with any other Polish forest. So even the state forest managed part is differing very much in a positive way with other forests in Poland. We also agree on that, and there's a lot of evidence for that, that it's natural dynamics and natural disturbance regimes that are important for shaping how this forest looks like, what species are there, what structures are there, and it's really shaping its values. On the other hand, there's also quite much evidence that some specific human intervention regimes are important for keeping some species there, especially the ones that are linked to more open areas. It's also quite clear for everyone that we all know about climate change, and this can influence how the bark beetle dynamics or other disturbance regimes will develop in the future in this forest. It's difficult to have this 20 minutes presentation and tell you everything, and I just realized that maybe I should have mentioned bark beetle. Probably everyone heard about it, but the decision from the European Court of Justice that Georg was talking about was linked to recent 2015 outbreak of bark beetle, which fueled the controversy that has been ongoing for the last 3 decades. The last 4 or 5 years were especially very hot, and really there was a big conflict. And it got fueled by this large bark beetle outbreak. So quite much discussions around the Białowieża Forest is around its ecology, and especially the bark beetle issue, which I will talk about a little in the next slide when I'm talking about the contested issue. We call it nicely open questions, but I could also call it conflict, controversy, disagreement, all of that we don't agree on, and there's quite many points to that. So first of all, there is no agreement. What should we prioritize in the Białowieża Forest? Which species, habitats, processes are important? Should we more focus, for example, on old growth forests, species linked to old growth forests, or should we more prioritize what has been supported by human intervention? Then there are two questions that are quite related. Is the size of the Białowieża Forest large enough to maintain its natural dynamics? This is linked very much to the question of management. Should we manage the forest to maintain its values, or should we leave it for free development? Some believe that anyway, the Białowieża Forest is not large enough to maintain all these natural processes. The forest will not manage itself. If we want to have it in the shape we want to have it, we have to manage this area. Others say no, the forest is large enough. There are already natural processes ongoing. It's possible to maintain that without intervention. Let's keep most of this forest undisturbed by human intervention. This is very much linked to the wild beetle outbreak. Should it be managed? Should it be left alone? Is it part of natural processes that actually are beneficial for the values of this forest? It's a big point of controversy that is being discussed, and there's no agreement on that. And linked to that, of course, should we do sanitary cutting when the outbreak starts? Some believe that the outbreak became so severe because there was not enough sanitary cuttings and it could have been stopped. While the others say no, it wouldn't be possible because there are a lot of nature reserves, so it's like kind of small patches of reserves, and it's not possible to maintain this buffer zones around them to get rid of all the trees that has been infected. And linked to that, of course, is also the question of salvage logging. The forestry coalition would like to remove the trees that already has been attacked and died just to. Of course, it's kind of obvious. It's how foresters do. It's state of the art. You shouldn't just waste all this wood. While the environmental coalition rather believes, let's leave it in the forest. Let's leave dead wood. It's beneficial for species there. It should be left there. So as you see, quite a long list of things that there's no agreement on when it comes to ecology. It's not only ecology, of course. Quite important part of the Białowieża Forest case and Białowieża controversy is the history of this forest. And the key question that is linked to its origin. Are the values that we have in Białowieża Forest human-made, or are they a result of natural processes? So there's a lot of evidence, archaeological evidence, historical evidence that shows that Białowieża Forest has been used for many purposes over centuries. There are maintained traces of human settlements, of agricultural areas, charcoal production. So it's not, definitely, you cannot call it a primeval forest because human has been there for centuries and having some activities. However, between 14th and 18th century, there was no hunting and timber extraction by local people because this was more or less closed forest as a royal hunting reserve. So it was only for kings and noblemen for hunting. So the key focus was then on game management, which also, of course, shaped what the forest looks like now. No matter all this human activity, there's clear agreement among all scientists involved in this initiative that conditions for natural regeneration of the forest have been preserved. The continuity of forest cover has been maintained all the time the forest has been existing, no matter what people were doing there. Open questions, again, controversy. Key question is the scale of all of this. I mean, people have been there, have been doing different things, but there's no agreement how much and on how large area. Yes, we have evidence of different traces of human use, of human activities, but they did significantly shape how the forest looks like now. This is very important discussion that leads to some political outcomes, of course, because depending on if we decide that the forest actually was shaped by human activities or by natural processes, there's totally different management that will be planned to maintain its values. That's why history is very important in this controversy. And then, of course, this 20th century forest management, when after the First World War, the forestry activities started in the Białowieża Forest, did it significantly change how the forest looks like, or was this impact not that big? There's no agreement on that either. So, basic question that comes from this too is it cultural or natural heritage? What should we focus on when we are planning management of this area? But the conflict doesn't finish with forest ecology and history. It's also all the socioeconomic factors, because this is the area where people live, where people work, where people get some benefits. So we try to also review this information on socioeconomic factors. Surprisingly, there was not that much, especially compared to all the ecological knowledge we have about this forest and the rich record of research in the Białowieża Forest. When we look at the whole Polish economy, there is not that large economic contribution of this forest. Of course, this is in the scale of the whole country, it's not that huge. But then local people, they perceive that they are quite dependent on fuel wood and non-wood forest products from the Białowieża Forest. We also know that the jobs in forest service are more prestigious and considered as better than the ones that would be in national park. So this is one point why it's the opposition against increasing the size of national park. Also, of course, everyone can agree you're here. It's a very important place, appreciated internationally, also very appreciated by Polish people. There are studies that show that Polish people would pay much more to travel to this forest, like 10 times more than to any other forest in Poland, for example. This is like symbolic, very, very big symbol in Poland with this bison, but it's also a kind of symbol. We have beer with bison. I'm Polish, by the way. So, as I said, we know it's an important place from social and economic perspective, but actually we don't know that much, as I said. So we don't really know what are the actual benefits. There has been no very specific, detailed economic analysis of what people, who and what they get from this forest. And also what would be the impacts if we increase national parks, if there will be more protection or less forest management, how would it influence for forest management, but also, let's say, benefits from tourism for the local communities. If you go to Białowieża and talk to different people, you will get all different answers about importance of forestry on one hand, or importance of tourism and this big projects there on the other hand. So we don't have really any data on that. Also about the symbolic yes, we know it's an important place, but nobody has done any like more cultural studies about the local communities, about the value of the forest. It's like on the border of Poland, eastern Poland. There is a kind of mix of different people with different origins. It can be very important cultural area also. So we don't know much about this. And then, of course, the quite important question is, should these local concerns or national concerns or international concerns be most taken into account when we plan the future of this forest? There's no argument on that either. And then what is the cost of the ongoing controversy? 3 decades. It must have influenced how this forest is perceived, how foresters are perceived, their reputation, how environmentalists are perceived. This is also something we don't know about. Finally, the forest policy and governance part. So basically, there is an agreement that political factors are quite important in this controversy. First of all, Białowieża Forest is covered by very different designations. There's national park, there's state forest, there are different nature reserves within the state forest. It's Natura 2000, it is UNESCO Biosphere, it's reserved as a reserve, UNESCO heritage site. All of this kind of overlaps, and there's a big question. So, who is kind of deciding there? All of this designation is not always like get together. It's also, we know that this controversy is driven by kind of power struggle between the two coalitions I mentioned at the beginning, which have different views how the forest should look like and what to prioritize. We could call it more conservation oriented or forest use or sustainable forest use oriented perspective, or rather maybe biocentric versus anthropocentric, if you could divide like that. And then, of course, this results in very different priorities which fuel the controversy. It's also quite important that there hasn't been a really meaningful effort to create some participatory process to connect these two groups, to have meaningful discussion. There has been different initiatives, definitely. Both sides tried to find solutions for the last 30 years. But still, I don't see that there has been a real conflict resolution effort that would mitigate the controversy. And when it comes to forest policy and governance part, we also don't know really that much. And particularly, we don't know what are the solutions. Some researchers say that we should organize participatory process, involve everyone, do it like large effort in trust building, so this polarized side can actually start talking to each other. While others said, no, the only solution is either you win or lose. I mean, it's like, it's so polarized that you cannot solve it by a dialogue. It has to be someone that decides what are our priorities regarding this forest. So there's no agreement on that. And then also we don't know how this higher level policy factors, like the ones linked to the European Union, for example, policy, how they influence this controversy, or how they can influence this controversy. Okay, so I went through these different points, and it looks very nice on the presentation, but you should imagine how the whole process looked like with 20 people, let's say more or less 10 on one side and on the other side, and trying to put it all together. It was fun, I can tell you. And I think we are still not there, but I think this initiative helped us to start talking to each other, kind of. Actually, there's a lot we agree on, which was really nice finding, I think. Just to conclude a little, this controversy has a lot of interlinked issues. They range from ecology to socioeconomic factors, policy factors, forest history. It's not just bark beetle outbreak that is actually driving the controversy. And I think what's important is to consider all of these aspects if you plan a meaningful conflict resolution. It's not just about showing scientific evidence about ecology that could help to make people talk, because there are also arguments about local people, or about history, or about priorities. Yeah, so basically it's not possible just to provide one solution. And I guess this is very relevant to other conflicts like this in other parts of the world, where usually the focus is on one issue, but actually you have to look at all these aspects and have some solutions to each of them, or at least most of them, to be able to deal with the conflict. It was also important that quite many questions that are politically critical, they are still contested, and quite many of them because we simply don't have data, like all the socioeconomic data that we don't have about this area. We think that this kind of participatory process could help this to mitigate conflict and make the people. We have example in our group when we started working on this. Actually, it was not that bad. We were able to start talking to each other. It's a painful process, yes, but still it's possible. And we think that it's also possible to help this conflict if you make genuine efforts to build trust and to communicate. Then it seems that both, simplifying both sides of the conflict, they really agree that there is need for some kind of zoning. So it's nobody, or almost nobody, that says no management at all, or nobody that says only management. Everyone agrees there are parts of the forest that should be protected and parts that should be managed because of the needs of different species, for example. The key issue is yet about the location and how this should be distributed. Environmental Coalition would like to have most of the forest without intervention, and just intervention in some areas to protect some values that are created by human intervention. Forestry Coalition would like to have much more management and less strictly protected areas. So there is no consensus how to create some kind of balance in that. And it is value driven. It is about priorities, but we still believe that should be also supported by the scientific evidence. So the process like we did to deliver this evidence is part of mitigating the conflict. The other part is about setting priorities really, and about organizing the process. Our process, I already talked about it, Björk mentioned that it's possible, even if it's hard and terrible as you called it. But it's still possible, and I think all of us learn from this process. We are working on this paper that was also mentioned before, and I'm getting crazy sometimes finalizing it, but it's working. So sooner or later, I hope you can see also the publication. And now we have the short version. Okay, thank you very much. And if you have any specific questions about what I presented, you can ask me, but then later we have also this panel debate where more broader issues will be discussed.
I think we stay for some more minutes because we decided to give a bit of room for questions of understanding about the things we have been doing in the Białowieża Science Initiative, and of course also nicely summarized where we are in this process. Just questions of understanding. If you have much stronger content-wise points, save them for the panel discussion for the dinner afterwards. There's a question over there.
Yes, Marco Nito from DG Environment. I'd like to thank you very much. This is very interesting. I'm a newcomer in the field, but I have a question on the process, which is more a personal curiosity. I've been dealing with environmental governance for some years, and I would like to know the choice of the scientist. Was it done, let's say, top down by you, or was it done by way of an open call where people were asked to manifest interest and then you chose? And if so, were there any people that was not selected, though they would have been, they would have liked to participate? So how, let's say, open was the process? And the second question I have is, are you considering to subject this study, once this is released, to some further peer review, or will it be like the end of the process? Thank you.
So first question, ask the boss.
The boss, yeah, I think this question will go to us as the organizers. What we did is we first looked into what is really in the debate, what are issues that come up on the political debate, and then from that we looked into the research landscape, Google Scholar, ResearchGate, and so on. And we checked who has been publishing on that, on what basis. That was the first step. And then we ended up with identifying these 5 areas. No, it's 4 in the paper because obviously this forest management issue is very, and conservation issue, biodiversity issue is very much linked to disturbances. And then we identified, well, okay, there's normally, you find, let's say, 4, 5, 6 people on some topics. It was very difficult to find anyone who has published internationally on the case. On others, there are many, like on ecological questions. Then what we did is we tried to also look a bit in the papers, well, where are people, let's call it, we always call it complementary, but in the end you can frankly say, where do they not agree? Where are they a bit more on this more active management side and on the other side? And then we started with the scientific criteria, and these criteria of renowned people that have different viewpoints, and we started to contact, let's say, from the top of the list, more or less. But also what we tried to do is we looked into 10 research that have really worked a lot on the forest specifically, and then we complemented that by 10 further researchers that are renowned international experts for the disciplines involved, but have not necessarily published much in Białowieża. So this, and we assigned different roles. I can talk a lot about that. We call these international scholars moderators. They had another role than the ones that have been really researching in the field. They had more this role of organizing this evidence finding process. There were very few people that we contacted that didn't want to participate, but they also existed. There weren't, to the best of my knowledge, people that asked to be included, but I had to look to Agatha if I forget someone. So it was in the end rather easy to assign people. We have been always thinking you could go also into law questions and whatever, but at one point also our resources were limited. And this is how we organize the process. And now the second question I think is for you, Gosha.
I will also add to this, because of your curiosity, that it was not that easy process, because it happened that somebody jumped off in the middle of it, because it was so difficult discussion. So I think it's also interesting to point out that this kind of process is not that easy. And the second question, I'm not sure I got it. Was it, you asked about peer-reviewed?
Yes, whether you are, whether the results, would you be?
Yeah, we are working on peer-reviewed paper, so we plan to submit it to a good scientific journal, so there will be a peer review, of course. Any more questions? Yeah.
I have a question on the follow-up. That's a little bit similar to the question here, but you received already signals from the research community. Yes, we are interested in these open topics which you identified, or did you receive from the policy side signals that there will be, let's say, discussion followed on your research paper?
I didn't, anyway, but I'm just a researcher. You deal with the policy part, so thank you.
Okay. I can only say, I mean, you had a lot of interest in the process. It would be, I'm not sure if now someone will come and say, please do this again for another case or whatever. But there's a lot of interest in the process. That's for sure. On the research side, I think, of course, many of the people, I was quite surprised about many open questions. And of course, as a researcher, I'm totally curious to tackle them. And one potential lesson, what we learned in this process, that it could be very, very interesting to really go for this complementary perspective also in how you organize science and research on the case. That you force people working together that come from different disciplines to agree and to do joint research. That would be the dream of a researcher in engaging in that, to think about that, talking to you as a funder in the future. So.
And I can also, I think it would be very interesting to conduct similar process for other conflicts, environmental conflicts. So if you want to give us any money for doing this, we are all for it. But I think it could lead to more generalizable outcomes that you could actually use in more practical application. It is, yes, we have some general findings, but still it's quite focused on one forest and one type of kind of setting context. So if you really want to be able to generalize the science, you should be able to cover different contexts.
I have two more quick questions of understanding, and then we have to stop that. But stay here for the panel discussion. Stay here after the panel discussion. We can eat and talk at the same time.
Yes, Ethan Underwood, Institute for European Environmental Policy. The lack of information on the socioeconomic factors doesn't surprise me, but do you think that was influenced through the way that you went looking at the academic publications, the type of publications you looked at? Did you make an effort to try and find that information in other ways? Or do you think it's truly not available?
I was responsible for this part, so I was actually doing very detailed review of scientific papers. But then I also tried to look for some more gray reports. But I can say that it can happen I missed something. I didn't do it in that very exhaustive way, mostly because we agreed to focus on published peer-reviewed science. But from what I know, there is not much of gray literature reports on this socioeconomics. But there are some, of course, and we also, for example, like I also tried to read some Polish studies, which is more about the specific socioeconomics that are in Polish language. So it was good to be able to also review them. There's still not much, and they are quite outdated. We have like studies from 2006 or 7, so it's no new studies.
I would like to say one sentence on that, because it was sometimes a bit frustrating that you had a sort of feeling for something, but if it hasn't been researched on, you couldn't include it.
It's rather a comment. My name is Grzegorz Mikusiński. I'm co-author of this, the upcoming paper. And I think honesty is very important, and it wouldn't be fair to say that everything was so fantastic. I have a contact with a lot of people, mostly on the environmental side of the environmentalist and the side of the conflict. And of course, there is quite a lot of lack of trust. So people are suspicious about this paper. Obviously they are. So I can imagine that it's a very important to somehow both produce really good paper, but then also have a campaign showing that this paper is really thought through and is like some kind of step forward after this 30 years of conflict that is still kind of unresolved, and maybe will be a step towards a solution.
I just want to comment on that, because of that also it was very important for me how the process was done. And I really putting a lot of effort to communicate with every co-author, not only sending papers and getting comments, but sending follow-up emails, discussing on the phone. I've had numerous discussions with individual researchers, trying to accommodate all the sides. And for this reason, we change a lot in the paper. And always when I change, I ask others. It's like a whole big process of it. And the key reason is not only to try to be objective, which we can never be objective, but also because of this, what you mentioned, this lack of trust people being suspicious. I don't want to that some people feel like, oh, they didn't take into account my side of the story. So it's really, I think we put a lot of effort into the process itself because of this.
Outside of our group.
Yeah. For me, it's more managing my group. I hope you can manage others.
Yeah, I mean, last comment from myself from the beginning was very clear that from both, if you want to talk about different sides, this is observed from different sides within the research community, but also within the policy community. And it has been very delicate also for us, even if it's an academically driven process. Every step we have been thinking about is a sort of fact, is it balanced? Do we take everything into account? And I have to really say you've been doing a fantastic job as a tough moderator, because otherwise you would still work on this in 10 years, but at the same time giving credit to all positions that can be based on scientific evidence. And this is our mantra in this process: scientific evidence is what we can account for. Good. But now, many of these questions that came up are a nice transition towards what's coming now. The idea was to have a panel discussion. Luckily, we could convince Ignacio, who is neither Polish nor he knows everything, no conservation specialist, but is the head of the European Forest Institute Mediterranean facility from FEMED, or still FEMED office in Barcelona. Someone who's very knowledgeable about policy, and he will moderate this panel discussion. So we try to put different participants of the initiative and selected small number of experts that were not involved in the initiative together. It's my pleasure. Let's start with the lady, Ms. Chantal van Ham from ICN. Chantal has come in front, the person that has been working in this conservation forestry issues since a very long time, and has been also in this process. We talked about this very early, and if this is possible or not, and she has been knowing about this, and it has been always a pleasure to talk with her about also what ICN is doing on this side. The second person is Piotr Golkowski, representing to the Executive Director of the European State Forest Association, and also Białowieża, I think, has been an important topic for him, not only because you are Polish, but also it's one of the biggest state forests, if not the biggest in Europe. That is an important part in this controversy. But we're happy that you're here to present just, of course, view on the process. Then, representing the Integrated Network, Thomas Hausmann is today here on behalf of the JEC, the Danish data agency who could come because they're in pre-election troubles. And then two participants of the scientists that are engaging in the paper are here. Now comes the most difficult name. Jacek Liszansky, the director of the Polish Research Forest Institute, is here, as well as Barbara Moyes, the head of the Forest Nature and Landscape Division of the KU. So, Ignacio, I hand it over to you. Look forward to an interactive debate on what can we learn from this case and what also can try to do or not do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you sharing this really interesting experience and presentation. I think it was important to have some questions for clarification and to jump already in the debate. But this means that we only have some 40 minutes left. I will ask all the speakers to be very precise. We'll try to a round of questions from the public, so you also can be very precise in the intervention, so we can make the best of the most of this thing that we have. All of us have been involved in policy, in forestry, from the local level to the European level. We follow the Białowieża case with great interest because it's a landmark. It's a strong symbolic value for all of us, and we really see this conflict in Białowieża reflected somehow in our everyday work and life. So this is my third question to you: is to what extent what you have learned and seen in this experience in Białowieża it has a replica somewhere else that you can see, and some of the lessons that could be useful there. So to what extent are we discussing a particular case? To what extent we are in a more, let's say, European or even global debate? Maybe we start with Thomas.
Yeah, first of all, although I had the honor and the pleasure to visit the national park in the area, I'm not commenting on the special case. So I will more focus on the issue, what can we learn from this process. First of all, I think it's an underlying problem, and it was mentioned by the presentation, the two different groups obviously competing. And that's exactly what the integrated network would like to overcome, that we talk to each other. And this process obviously was very beneficial to bring people together. I already mentioned in my short intervention the importance of science. But what is, I think, even more important is the trust of the public, that first of all, foresters and forest owners are in the position also to ensure nature conservation. In Germany, we have a debate, even if it's still allowed to cut trees, at least in the urban areas, that's a discussion going on. And of course, we need to explain, not only for all the arguments you all know with the climate change, the substitution effect, that we all love to use timber for various issues, but also that you need to explain that there are concepts out that you can manage forest and still securing nature conservation. This integrated forest management is a concept which is out there and can be applied and should be even more applied in future. So this is a topic not only for Poland, I think it's a topic for all the countries in Europe to get these issues back.
Thomas, just to continue this, if I look at the integrated network, you are trying to move the discussion from yes or no to how much. Conservation versus use, deadwood yes or not, logging or not, but you're moving it to how much of what. It's easy to make this debate, and this is a question you can also reflect on when you come to it. Is it possible to move from the yes and no, conservation versus use of forest, to the how much of what on a given forest in an integrated approach? What do you experience in this? Is it what you're trying to do, to move into how much, to have agreements on?
First of all, it's a decision of each of the governments, it's a decision of the forest owners, and of course, I mean, Mustafa will talk about compensation for private forest owners later on, and that's of course an important topic. But I learned that you should secure your biodiversity hotspots also in medium term, no doubt. If it's 5%, if it's 10%, that's up to the governments and to the areas. But we are more concerned on the remaining 95 or 90% of managed forests, and that their nature conservation plays an important role. And to go out with our network, with our excursions, to learn how this can function.
Thank you very much. Yes, and first of all, congratulations to this initiative and the great work that has been done. So I think it was already mentioned, the FS report, the global biodiversity loss. We've seen the EU footprint report presented last week as well, looking at the resource use and the impact it has at a global level. And I think that a lot of this debate also goes back to the fact that we don't take into account the value of our natural capital in our overall wealth. And with that, we don't give enough balance to how we deal with these emblematic areas like Białowieża and the many other protected nature areas, and finding common ground for the economic, social, and environmental benefits that these areas provide. So I think there is at this moment a very strong need to reverse the trend. And actually, the G7 has produced a report that looks exactly at that, at biodiversity, which is interesting to see it on that agenda, and to look at that investment gap that we see, which is about $300 billion at the global level. At the same time, we know, of course, that the values that forests provide, and many of those are not taken into account economically, present more than our world GDP. And so I think it's also very much about finding ways how we can give support to the forest owners and the forest managers, and how they can tap into public and private sector sources to make the changes that are needed to move towards this integrated type of management, and to also look into ways, and that's one of the recommendations of the UNESCO mission that looked at Białowieża, and how we can find these sustainable outcomes also for the benefits for the community, the wider community.
Thank you, Dr. Just to build up a little bit on this, you say it's a matter that we're not valuing our natural capital. But in particular, Białowieża, everybody thinks it's improving the management and protecting the natural capital. So are we in a science questions, or are we in a truly political question here?
I
I think in fact it's geopolitical, because I think that biodiversity and the health of our natural ecosystems are probably the biggest security risk in this century that we're facing. And the fact that natural capital is not part of our wealth accounting or GDP system is, I think, a very serious issue. And I would kind of say let's move towards a gross life product.
But it's a technical issue. Measuring is a technical solution.
Yeah.
You think that science could put some clarity data figures that could help us in the decisions in the perspective?
I'm afraid science is not enough. I think we have more knowledge in this world than we ever had before. Unfortunately, it's not used effectively in our decision-making processes. I think what is important is that we bring together all the key actors that need to come into play here, and the private sector is a key one. Maybe one example of the work that ICN is doing is another scientific advisory panel, actually for the Western grey whale, which was overexploited in the last century. And the last 15 years, this panel has advised one of the main gas and oil operators in the east coast of Russia, Shakali Energy, in how to reduce the impact on biodiversity. And the population of Western grey whales has been increasing in the last 10 years to 3 to 4% per year, and has moved down on the red list of threatened species. So I think science and practice and business can try to come around with solutions.
Thank you. Yes, so you have quite an overview of the situation in managing foresting across Europe, public lands across Europe. Sometimes there's more pressure on public lands to deliver some public goods. Can you highlight and you reflect on this, and have you highlight some cases or some thoughts about how this case could have some values or in other places?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting also me to this interesting debate. And then, indeed, I do believe there is a growing need and a kind of growing pressure, because we have Białowieża is a good example to illustrate. However, this is not the only case where we can talk about certain conflicts or different approaches in looking at this problematic, let's say, cases. And then, good question is whether we should talk whether to protect or use, or, for example, how much protection in the forest. We need to find a compromise by bringing people to the table, and then I believe it's the good role that research community can play. From the presentation, I was a little bit concerned that Małgorzata presented that apparently in this case we have two kind of communities with quite opposite view on this issue, and then the problem is how to bring them together to sit at one table, and then how to find a solution. What I always believe is worth to start with is the real information, practical information, and then we are not talking about something which is in the mist. We are talking about forest, which used to be managed for long time. We are talking about a forest which has been measured, which has been very well described. It has been the area of scientific investigations for decades. But apparently, the situation now is a result of certain decisions, political decisions, which were taken. And also this has to be taken into account, because it happened that we came to a big calamity in the forest, and then we need an answer, what to do and how to do. And also what we need, maybe we need to compare with Białowieża Forest is a forest divided by the political border. Maybe we need also to take the example from the other side of the border, and then to see what's the picture there. Probably the approach to management is a bit different there. I remember this forest, I saw it 4 years ago, and then I saw it then back in 2006. And then I was also on the border pass where I could see, at least from a distance, the Belarusian side of the forest and the Polish at that time. And then a couple of years afterwards, 4 years ago, as I said, in 2015, the picture was, to my understanding, quite opposite when we compare the two sides. And then maybe it would be also good to have it into account kind of analysis why it happened like that, because then the calamity, which has a big impact on the current situation, is really well known. It's nothing that happened for the first time in the world's history. And then I believe there are also silvicultural measures to deal with this, and then there are also enough research to find the explanations. But you asked me about also certain kind of references also to the other situation. What we have reported by our member organizations, I do represent the association which associates state forest organizations. So, like the manager of the part, the problematic part we are talking about in the Białowieża case. And then we have similar, actually, reporting now in Slovakia, for example. There is a problem of similar calamity, which leads to the similar social problem or local problems within the communities dealing with it. We have also, I think, growing problem with the bulk beetle or with the spruce stands, maybe not necessarily in the forest of the same type in Slovenia, in Czech Republic, in spots of Germany. So the problem is much bigger than this one spot. And then the problem is growing, I believe. And that's why using these particular cases would be good to work out certain solutions which could be applied also.
You know any similar experience to this one about putting scientists together to discuss these issues?
No, I don't know this that kind of experience. However, I know that if any tangible or practical solutions can be worked out on this particular case, this can be applied somewhere else.
Very good. Second or last question. When you read a scientific paper that the one that is producing, what is your general attitude of that of your members to a paper? Because we work in front of a discussion of researchers among researchers, discussing from research perspective. So when you read, as a manager, research papers like this one, compilations of knowledge, what is your attitude? You are curious with them, you read them eagerly, you just repeat the things you like. How do you add value to you? Yes, 1 minute answer.
I mean, you know, it's not like cherry picking exercise. I don't want to take what I like. I need the solution. And I believe that
you normally find it like
you know, now when I analyzed what is the scientific agreement or agreement among the researchers, what are the open questions? I'm not, I must say, very surprised with what is put in this or in other column. I'm curious how to arrive to solution on what is still to be answered. Good. And I think then this is the key.
The key point. Maybe we will have time to get into that later. So, Jesse, please. A reflection about how general is this, maybe a specific case in that you've been involved in, different from the bit,
Yeah, I'm one of the authors of this fantastic group of scientists which agree to work together, even they don't agree on specific issues. Yeah, but I think it was really good time we spent together and working with those people was quite beneficial also for me. And especially it was one of the first such actions that people representing quite different options were sitting together and thinking about what to do with the particular forest. But I agree with Grzegorz that there are some people also for our side, not only among ecologists, so to say, but also among our side, that people will have some doubts about the paper, you know, if it's really good enough, let's say. Of course, we haven't solved problems. We have a long list of problems which need to be solved. Also by science. There's a lot of scientific issues which are not solved in Białowieża Forest. Even, we have a history of probably about 100 years of research in that forest. We have plots established in strict reserve in 1936, and we see more or less what is going on in that forest. And there are really certain problems which have to be solved in that forest, but probably many other forests in our climate. Do you know? I ask you a question. Do you know how many pine seedlings, pine regeneration is in strict reserve of Białowieża Forest?
You answer.
My answer is none. It means there's a quite important issue. It means that strict protection in that certain place is 5,000 hectares. It's 5,000 hectares of strictly protected forest since almost 100 years. And there is no any pine regeneration. We all agree that pine is very important species in that forest. It's to pine is
Yes, but that's good you raise this. Science has some questions also, maybe some perturbation that Christopher Jameson at some specific moment. But I want to reflect on something different.
the problem is there's no these disturbances which could enhance pine regeneration, because we stop fires, human-induced fires, we stop them like 50 years ago. There's no fires anymore in Białowieża Forest, which enhanced pine regeneration in the past. I was talking about many times, but Białowieża is for me, from my perspective, is too small to keep natural processes to keep certain big part of diversity of the forest.
Yeah, but declaration in Yellowstone with the big fires. We are not, the reserves are too small, probably. My question is, in this debate, you have these technical questions or these reflections about, because it's time and space, it doesn't happen this year, maybe next year, maybe in 100 years, and for the forest it could be okay for them. So you have all this different discussion in terms of natural processes, time, relax, spatial distribution. But then when it comes to questions like Thomas, Piotr, or Sandra were raising, which are very political in nature, how do you feel with those questions? Should we monitor or not? Should we do more or less?
For me, it's a matter of zoning. Yeah, how big it should be a certain zone. For me, this strictly protected zone is big enough. We haven't found any new things extending this strictly protected zone. If it will be 5,000 hectares or 10,000 hectares or 30,000 hectares, doesn't matter. It doesn't change the situation. But we need that. It is very good. It's very good. One of the best examples of strictly protected forest in the lowland of Europe. And we are observing this slow process of domination of hornbeam, etc., etc. It's very useful, and we need that. But I don't agree that we have to extend this strictly protected area. There's much more things to protect, species and sites, different, which don't need maybe strict protection.
We have time. We come to a second round discussing. So if it looks so simple to say let's have some zoning and then decide on what this seems like a promising discussion. You also raised it. So why cannot we get into that? So why it doesn't happen? What is the true origin of this conflict? Maybe you can reflect a little bit in the second round. But I want to hear from Bart. So you have quite another view in Europe.
Yeah, so the question was what is generalizable and what not. So one very interesting thing, generalizable, is that the third player is coming into play, which is very much affecting this conflict, and it's climate change. So this big barnacle attack, in this time is maybe not a coincidence. Professor Tomasius already made modeling predictions on the future of spruce in Europe 30 years ago, saying if we have a 2 degrees increase, the actual distribution of spruce will drastically decrease. Of course, in the mountain, yeah, it goes up a few hundred meters, but in the lowland, a few, yeah, it's with hundreds of kilometers. So both the foresters, they see economically important species becoming not suitable anymore for its good goal, but also for conservation. We have now this Natura 2000 goals, which are trying to be strictly realized in many of the reserves, all based on potential natural vegetation. But is the oak horn beam forest still the potential natural vegetation of Białowieża Forest? If you walk around there in an area where there's no beach, you see the beach seedling just coming in. So for both parties in conflict, things are changing and are changing fast, and play the game. So I think that's generalizable. If you go to other conflict between conservation and management, climate change, global change is coming in. Then something that is not easily generalizable is the origin of the conflict, which according to me is context specific. In Białowieża, the conservationists plead for no management intervention, and the foresters for management interventions. But attention, don't think that it's everywhere like that. If you come here to Western Europe, to the Netherlands or Belgium, it's the other way around. The foresters, yeah, they want to manage, sustainably manage, don't cut too much, have rather high stockings in forest, and the conservationists, they want to intervene much heavier. They want to create open spaces, they want to create heathlands in the forest, so the other way around. Also, the foresters have context-dependent targets. In some areas, it's more production dependent, and we call that the weight theory. All the other functions are supposed to follow. But in other areas, multifunctionality or nature conservation becomes much more important, just like in integrate project goals. So this conflict is not easy, and it's not everywhere the same. So for conservation, the closer an area is to the natural status, and this is the case in many continents in South America, but maybe Białowieża Forest is the forest in Europe, which is the close to that, quite close to nature, not completely, but quite close to nature, where the conservationists plead for non-intervention. But in other areas, it makes no sense. And even in the Białowieża Forest, there has been evidence of certain species, like you said, that are only there, can be very rare and very conservation important species. They are there, but we know that they're only there thanks to management intervention. So if you stop the management intervention, you agree to remove those species, right? So yeah, probably zoning is the only way. But then the big question is how much of this and how much of that. And that's probably a political question because it's value driven. What kind of biodiversity do we want? Which species are priority for us, and so on. It's value driven.
But I have one question for you. Coming now, we jump into the science interface. And just developing the public. Piotr was saying before, we need to bring people to the table. But you had some discussions in the forest here, asking you, does it help to discuss in the forest these issues?
It very much helps to discuss in the forest, and it's even essential. If I look back in my personal career, 25 years ago, I was responsible to have the first roundtables on FSC certification here in Belgium. And the target was to come to the FSC standard for Belgium. And there were huge issues between conservationists and foresters. They were unsolvable. It was about what is a clear cut and how large can be a clear cut, and what is a natural forest, and what kind of interventions are still allowed there. And the only way to solve that conflict was to really go in the field and really go to discuss the issues with concrete examples. And there, foresters and conservationists, they start to speak a more similar language, because in the field, you discover from the other there's certain knowledge, certain experience that's complementary, that you can share, and you start to understand each other. So also here in this exercise, I thought it was really essential to be in Białowieża Forest, to have a little excursion in the field. It really softens the points of view, and it helps to find comfort.
The question was because we are facing a situation where we are lacking forest hours. So we have to have discussions on forest, and here in Brussels it's very typical that we discuss on forest, and we have never almost or very seldom we go to the forest or discussing in the forest. I think it's quite important. But I would like to open the time for you to have if you have some questions for our panelists, to be brief in the question and any issue you want to discuss.
I would like to comment a little bit, and it's a Białowieża-focused discussion, not that strange, but two or three things. First is that we are dealing with a forest that in Białowieża is kind of representative for something that was one of the most common forest types, primal, more or less, before extensive loggings that took place maybe first wave in the early medieval, and then there was and it is calculated that about 0.2% of this type of forest is left in the form or in the state of naturalness similar to Białowieża, and most of it is simply in Białowieża. 0.2%. So think about representativeness and compare this, for example, with AG Target 11, that is saying that we should protect 17% of terrestrial habitats worldwide being represented. So you can think, yeah, and we have most of it just in Białowieża.
Yeah, but what is the message for this process? That you say that we are not fulfilling political responsibility, that we are not aware of the global picture and the true values of what we want to protect.
Yes.
What is the message?
The message is the contrast between what is protected and how representative it is with our political goals that we set up globally, and how it is, in Europe and in Polish context. I mean, it happens that this Białowieża Forest is in the European community. The second thing is just more biological, that the forest, why forest has so many threatened species. For two main reasons. One is the forest loss in the area. Simply, some forest has been logged because of, especially on fertile soil, they have been changed into agricultural land. And the second is that we have forestry that, of course, for a very long time was interested in especially good production, securing leverage of timber. And this causes the problems and the long list of red listed species in any country that has forest. And what we do, an example about the hornbeam being a problem, it's taking over. I just can say that hornbeam is not interested in forestry. And this is one of the most important species for hole nesters. Otherwise, that's the reason that we often in forest, we go to the managed forest, we are putting nest boxes because there are no trees that are able to produce natural cavities that are safer. Yeah, there are studies from the Białowieża Forest showing that the natural cavities developed through process of trees being rotten are producing natural cavities that are much safer and selected by birds, and many of them are threatened. And if you look at the list of species for Natura 2000, most of them are linked to old forest species, and most of them are resident birds.
Can we do this policy science interface and reflection on that? Do we have the knowledge? Knowing will help us moving ahead. It's not a question for our two scientists. I would like to ask them. I was surprised in the presentation that we have this coalitions divide value the event. But there was no mention on disciplinary divides. So social scientists and ecologists and foresters or geneticians or soil researchers, they all align in these two alliances. So is the value divide which really makes the conversation go, or do you have this close, some bridges in disciplines? So people are looking at sociology, maybe are they the same? They have more. You see, do you have some different approaches for the discipline? Maybe sociology, maybe also for you, or all you have been involved. Just try to be brief because we are just coming to time. Any reflection there?
Yeah, I'd say I think that in this conflict, across the domains, you have these two groups. So you find social scientists, which more adhere to the conservation group, and other social scientists more adhering to the forest group. And the same for the forest history experts. So it clearly shows that even if you're a natural scientist, you're never value free. You can try to be objective and rational, but you're never value free. You have a certain belief, and with your research, you test and hypothesize, try to see, can I prove my beliefs? And I think that's why it's so difficult to come to an agreement. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree with you. As I understood your question, of course, there are many people from these basic groups we have divided. It was, for me personally, I was focusing mainly on the disturbances and forest ecology. But for me, it was very fruitful to see also the other perspective of other people. You know, before we met together, for me, it was quite unknown. All this was out of my scope. Especially, you know, forest history in Białowieża. I haven't been interested in that very much, but I realized after some time that this is really important thing. You know, we can, for this kind of forest, which is really best preserved piece of forest in lowland of Europe. I thought that the history is not so important. I mean, the human activity in the forest wasn't so big, so there wasn't a big effect of human management on shaping of the forest. But after all these things we've done, after the papers I have read, and also after the research, which is still ongoing in Białowieża Forest nowadays. You know, we use these sophisticated methods, you know, with LiDAR scanning of the forest, so we can now detect very small human artifacts which were before undetectable. And we found thousands of human produced things like, you know, graves, fields, settlements, even a street reserve in the forest. So I realized that historical background of the forest is really important. It was really important in shaping the forest. And it's the same, I think, in most of the forests in Europe. We have to take this under consideration. If we don't do that, we will lose something.
I have one question for our, let's say, should I take one from the public? Okay, yes. Yeah, can we take a few more minutes because we're just open up. Yeah, open up, but we are on a few more minutes. Please try to be brief because we started
something I would like to have a comment with the audience. I work with CEPIF, who represent the private forest owners, so we are at the other side of the support, or we even say the other side of the same building. What you mentioned in the research, so this polarization between conservationists and more forestry, is something that, well, it happens in research, but it's happened, I would say, on every field linked to forest. And in my case, this is something I witness very often when we speak about forest-related policy at the EU level. And is there any lesson learned that we could use from your research to improve what happened? Because this was a lot of difficult work to reach consensus, and even so, you have a significant list of points that remains to be solved. Is there anything that we could use, or also to the audience from your experience? Is there a positive example that could be showcased to improve this communication and be able to reach a better consensus?
We can take a second question, please.
Thank you. Ethan Underwood, Institute for European Environmental Policy. I'm particularly interested in how you, your views on how you can tackle this decision-making process that needs to occur on zoning. And I'm assuming you're just talking about the state forest area. So as I understand it, there would need to be a process that translates all this information that's been gathered into spatially differentiated information that people can use to discuss about different areas. So you would have to map the ecosystem services information that you have, the gaps in knowledge. We'd have to map the habitats and species. We'd have to map the forest management issues, the historical issues. Is there anything going on in that area, and this could possibly relate to lessons learned?
You have a question? The question is about if there is tools or approaches or phrases?
Yeah, what are you doing? Yeah. What's happening?
To jump into this discussion in the field about how much zoning and to really start in the, let's say, in the negotiation, in the process solving.
Yeah.
So
there is a lot going on nowadays. I mean, we have for example, except some research which is, for many years done in Białowieża, we know more or less where we have the precious species and habitats. We know that. And the zoning which we have nowadays, for me, it's completely not connected with that. I mean, a good example is, for example, sorry, we have 4 butterflies reserves in Białowieża Forest, and those reserves are in the zone where we cannot do anything basically. For sure, we cannot cut trees. Butterflies need open space. Everybody knows that. So there is no butterflies nowadays in that reserves. Butterflies which are protected by Natura 2000. And this is a problem, big problem. And such a problems, there is much more such a problems. So changing the zoning is something we have to do very, very fast, because we are observing the fast process of extinction of some species which need active management, active protection.
Thank you. Thank you for an example, because it shows that this, it was mentioned before, this priority of what we're protecting exactly. Is the butterfly, is the structural diversity, is the cultural heritage? This is a key question. But I have a question for you, Santa, for example, in your experience, and coming to the last question. Looking at this Białowieża situation, where you have 2 groups, coalitions of well-prepared people, well-prepared researchers, and knowledgeable, that have totally different views of what is to be done. And then you have the societal response. It looks sometimes that it's like curious on there is the governance issues, the approach to forestry. I think the forestry community has been used to, I'm the forester, I know, I program, and now forestry is in a totally social context. It's a social science, and it's working with people even more than working with forests maybe. So anyway, my question is, in your experience, is there anything related to lessons learned or some key messages about the way we decide to make this habitat, to intervene, the way we communicate, the way we participation? Is there something that could help mitigate these issues more than the actual things that they really do in the forest?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it was very good to be in the forest and to have these conversations there. I believe it's important to take any group in society to the forest, so children, politicians, together with scientists and everyone, to really get to a deeper level of understanding of what all these controversies are, but also what the values are and the opportunity and what it means to all of us. And I think to some extent that leads back to the role that we have in light of upcoming EU elections as Europe to be an example to the world. The theme of the Green Week being enforcement of legislation. So that is one thing, knowing that about 30% of forest species are threatened with extinction. There's still a long way for us to go. But I think that I believe in non-conventional partnerships. So IUCN, for example, is working with Toyota on assessing a great number of plant species that otherwise wouldn't have been assessed, and it has nothing to do with cars, but with the fact that Toyota is based in a region in Japan that is very much treasuring its regional landscapes and its traditional values. And that's why we decided to invest in this large-scale research that is important to IUCN and to the work for the red list. At the same time, we've also done these kinds of stakeholder dialogues. That's at the heart of our work. We are a global union of members, both governments and NGOs, but we work also with indigenous communities and with business leaders. And another initiative that we've undertaken has to do with aluminium extractive industries and the value chain that goes from the level of capsules used for the Nespresso coffee to the producers and the extractors of these raw materials, and finding ways to reduce the impact on biodiversity and finding common ground through a long process of participatory thinking
So we'll take this participatory thinking, these non-conventional partnerships, bringing in voices of non-conventional actors, and this long-term, no shortcut, long process to solve it.
I would like to add the issue of scaling. I mean, the EU policy was mentioned just going down to the local level, and you mentioned the role of foresters. It has completely changed over time. So if you talk to the city forester of the city of Bonn, where I'm coming from, he would say that 80% of his time is dedicated to be a mediator between different stakeholder groups. So the issue is not the traditional old field of forestry. And of course, this multi-sectoral consultation is, I think, up to date at the local level, where you have normally not the biggest problems. It's more a problem if it's getting a symbolic issue. I mean, Białowieża, we had also a symbolic issue in Germany recently with the Hambacher Forest. And then, of course, it's very difficult to find a compromise if it's already at this stage. So I would be happy if at a very early stage of a potential conflict, such a mediation could take place in order to bring it down from emotions down again to science-based discussions.
A mediator mediates in a process. In a process, the decision making, so it is the parties. Consultation, but for decision making. Rosa, you want to say? And then Pietro has also a message. Thank you.
Just to relate a little to your question and also what you said here, I see this kind of conflict as something that, like, first to lead to some solutions, we need to have knowledge. But then the knowledge, so quite much facts, quite much information also showed in our initiative. But then, even if you have knowledge, it doesn't always work. It's not enough. So as you said, there's only thing that is not really working that well, even if we know there are the butterflies that are important, whatever. So first, knowledge is not enough because it's not always applied how it should. But also in the case of this kind of polarized conflict, it's not only about experts having knowledge and deciding something. You have to also manage all the emotions. And actually, you stole my conclusions that I made in my notes because I wanted to say this needs to be done as soon as possible. I mean, after, I started investigating this forest in 2006. I started my PhD, my first study in my PhD thesis, 2006, making interviews in Białowieża Forest. Since then, nothing changed, or rather, it got worse. It hadn't been solved. It's now, 12, 13 years. And for me, it almost seems like a hopeless conflict. I'm very happy we started talking with different sides. And we, as I said, you learn something, I learned something, everyone learns something, like to think about history and its importance and so on. But basically start and then take knowledge into account, but also take other interests. It cannot be just experts applying the knowledge. It has to be listening to others and also being transparent about how you apply the knowledge. I think lack of transparency of the process. Poland hasn't been a democratic country for that long time, and I think this also has consequences. How the controversy started in the 90s. We're a very young democracy, and it influenced that there was like no tradition of open participatory processes, sharing information, even informing local people. There's huge distrust in local communities because of that. So this all contributes to this conflict. Yeah.
So there were some keywords about early, as early as possible, transparency. Piotr, you had a message to share with us, and then we invite the speakers to give us maybe 1 minute final thought, recommendation, take-home message. So just think about 1 minute.
Yes, so then I think I can combine also my 1 minute message. First of all, again, I think it's very important that sort of neutral forum is provided, because apparently the conflict went far enough to polarize these two antagonizing groups. And then this is not only the Białowieża Forest case. This case illustrates very well, but also we are sitting here. And we are also in a sort of polarized opinions and understanding of what's going on, for example, with the EU policy development when it comes to the role of forest. And we need to find a solution because we got too far away from each other. And I mean, mainly, I do represent certain ownership type. Ellen mentioned whom she represents. And then we have also colleagues from environmental organizations. And I think that we need to start talking to each other and listening to each other, to our argumentation. And then I have full respect to like what especially professors say about this, what they have checked or investigated what is still to be done. And of course, butterflies are important and the dynamics in the ecosystems. But we need to find a solution, because then what we should underline, the main area of conflict in Białowieża sport is not the national park, it's not the strict reserve, which has been protected since 1923. It's the forest which is managed. And there are controversies over this, how to manage it. But while the controversies and then disputes sometimes very much, heated takes place, the forest is dying, because the forest is being eaten by the park people. And then at least what I could see 4 years ago, any try of regeneration in these open spots which appeared in place of the dead spruce individual trees, was also overgrazed by overpopulated area. So these are the problems, and then apparently how to solve it is different. And then I would like to know in what to do and how to do, but also I would like to know how my counterpart would like me to act. And then what is also important, that we are operating in certain economic realities, but also legal realities. I'm far away from the political conflict. I don't want to touch it at all. But we are operating in legal realities which determine how forest management should be done in this or in other parts of Europe. And we have to fulfill at least as managers, yes. Because we can talk, and then we would like to talk to our partners, the different stakeholder groups, but this has to be based into realities we are operating. Thank you.
Again, this keyword solution seeking management. Science is important, but in the framework, in the legal social framework for coming up to recommendations and real solutions. And then I give for researchers to discuss about forest dying as a concept. Just take 1 minute, please, because I think we have some person and we need to leave. 1 minute, final message. Everyone, yes, invite you. Everybody. Yeah, everyone 1 minute. Yes. Yeah, 1 minute.
I haven't said any word about bark beetles. It's strange for me because it's my main topic of my research. But it means only that bar beetle is not the most important thing in the problem. This is the only bar beetles has focused our thinking that something is going wrong, what we are doing in such a place like Białowieża and probably in many other places. It's more about general strategy of protection, of conservation of such a precious places. And one thing important for me is that we shouldn't forget about local people, which has a lot to say about it. And for me, it will be easier to convince local people to protect that forest, conserve that forest, if we explain them that their activity is important to protect that forest, like it was 100, 200, and maybe long time ago, when beekeepers were burning the forest, where people were, where domestic animals were grazed the forest, they had an impact on the forest. So we shouldn't forget about local people, trying to convince them that they are important element of their place.
Will you have a message for us? Yeah, the two key threats have been mentioned tonight, climate change and biodiversity loss. To just underline for me, save the and leading save the biodiversity hotspots like the Białowieża strict reserve is top priority, and then try to enhance biodiversity on the whole of the remaining forest in Europe. Learning, capacity building, knowledge transfer from the existing best practice cases and research is needed. And last point, improve communication to all the relevant stakeholders in order to explain while it's also needed and it's also justified still to manage and to use timber and forest, like it was mentioned by Jacek.
Yeah, building on that, indeed, in light of the upcoming discussions on the EU's multi-annual financial framework, to really get the financial flows right and to find the balance between economic, natural, and human capital in all our sectoral disciplines, and to also make sure that the forests and the people who manage and own them get the support, get the resources and the capacities in order to move forward in these types of difficult situations. I think it's something that should be the main priority for all of us.
Okay, right, fine.
So yeah, it was said that at the local level, the things are much more moderate, and I agree. And I can also say that there's a lot of tools developed to do this participatory zoning exercises. There's a tremendous amount of work done on building tools to quantify ecosystem services, to identify the trade-offs, to calculate scenarios, to see what is the consequence of a certain management decision or another, and to do that with stakeholders so they can visually see what is the outcome of one decision or another. So we should more use these tools to prevent conflicts or to solve conflicts, especially at this landscape scale. At the larger scale, I believe that the problem is much deeper because it has a lot to do with also power games. It's not just about interventionists versus non-interventionists. I told already, sometimes conservationists or for intervention, sometimes they are for non-intervention. It's a power game all about influence on land, on people, amount of budget, employees in state government, management groups, etc., and on means. And that's not easy to solve. But if I can say this, it can help to try to understand each other better. And long time forests had two serious gaps. I'm a forester myself. The first thing is that foresters need to know their biodiversity. And that's not always the case in their education. They need to know species requirements, what kind of management or no management leads to what biodiversity. That has not always been the case. And they also need more to learn about social sciences, bottom-up approaches, and so on. That's also not the case. And from the other way, also conservationists need to learn a lot from foresters. And what they can especially learn from foresters is the management experience and techniques to realize multiple ecosystem services on one piece of land. Because it's an illusion to believe that worldwide we will solve the biodiversity crisis with land-sparing approaches only. And I think the European agriculture situation is a very clear example that the limits of land sparing have been reached. The neonicotinoids and all the problems with fertilizer and pesticides are not only affecting the agricultural land, they're affecting all of Europe, showing that land sparing has its limits. And once land sparing has its limits, you have to go to land sharing. And there the foresters have a tremendous long experience of knowing how to do that. So they can learn from each other.
So we have quite many keywords there. We have communication, we have our training as part of the first interface, understanding different scales in the debates. We have this issue of constructivization of professions and attitudes. So many things to reflect on. I will ask for a clap to our panelists.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ignacio. Thanks a lot to the panelists. Thanks a lot to those that are still in the room. We have some snacks and some drinks for you now. Perhaps the last comment, there was a question of what can we as policymakers learn from that? I think it has become apparent also by statements by different scientists involved in the process that perhaps the biggest beauty of this whole thing is that we really brought by different people together, and that if you read this paper one day, you will see where even they could agree, where they couldn't agree, and it will become very, very explicit why they couldn't agree and why they could not agree, only based on published research. I would like to stress this very much, and I think this diversity has become quite apparent. Now, I think we haven't resolved any issue relating to Białowieża, as well as to forest conservation and biodiversity management in Europe. That was to be expected, and therefore we have some drinks for you and some snacks, and we still have a bit of time to continue. Perhaps we are even much wiser in the end of that. Thank you.